Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I'm back for my Week 3 NA Academy analysis, overview, and power rankings. This was a very interesting week, a lot of fun storylines here in Academy, probably the most anticipated week by far because of a certain team's debut, at least with their actual roster. So I'm excited to get into all the games. If you guys like these kinds of videos, if you're excited for the Academy video, go ahead and drop a like, go ahead and drop a comment. Lets me know that you guys are interested in this kind of content, but I don't want to waste too much time, so let's go ahead and jump right into our first series of the week here, our series of day one, and that was FlyQuest Academy taking on CounterLogic Gaming CLG Academy. Kind of a top versus bottom matchup here. We do have a roster change, what with the LCS season starting up this exact same weekend. Palafox is out of Academy. Triple is still not here yet. Palafox obviously getting ready to play on stage for CLG proper. But because Triple's not here yet, their position coach Demonte is filling in the mid lane, very similar to what 6A is doing on Golden Guardians Academy right now. But Demonte in the mid lane here for CLG Academy, and he looked really, really good in this series. This team is on fire. They are one of, if not the best team in Academy right now. Especially at this point, they just look like they can do no wrong. They're 9-1. They win this series 2-0, 2-0 by the way. 2-0, however you want to say it. Demonte is going to be my player of the series here. I thought he was fantastic. For someone who really isn't playing a lot of competitive right now, you know, obviously I imagine he's still playing solo queue, but he's transitioned over to kind of being a coach for CLG. He filled in really simply for this team. He had a great game 1 and a great game 2. I want to give a shout out to Dokla. Dokla was really solid this series too. I feel like I've said that a lot this year, but Dokla and Rosethorn up at the top lane actually have really sneakily great chemistry. I think they work together really well, or at least they have so far this year. They seem to pretty much always be on the same page, and I think that's helped contribute to Dokla just being a really strong laner. Yes, it's into Philip, who I would consider to be one of the weaker top laners in Academy, but still, Dokla looked really phenomenal in this series in general. Rosethorn as one of the best facilitators in the entire Academy scene. He's been arguably one of the MVPs of the split so far, and then my personal pick for MVP of the split so far, Prismal, had a good series as well, although maybe a little bit down. 2 games of Varus is going to do that, though. You don't necessarily have the same kind of impact on Varus that you would on someone like Aphelios or someone like Jinx or even Jhin, like some of the other things that Ezreal, some of the other things that you know, might be a little more meta right now. I still think Varus is definitely a playable pick, but, you know. And then Breezy, Prismal and Breezy, I should say, have just been really good. I don't want to underrate Breezy as well. Breezy is my guy, my ASU guy. So, yeah, I just, you know, really good start to the year for CLG. Demonte looking really solid in his first series here. FlyQuest just doesn't really have the talent to match up here with CLG. We kind of knew that going into the series. My dud of the series is going to be Tomo in the bot lane. He did not have a very good week here. This could have gone to Diamond on the Nautilus both games. This could have gone to Philip, but I thought Tomo definitely had the worst game out of anybody in that game 2 here on Aphelios. It was just not very good overall. But, you know, I don't want to take too much away from FlyQuest. They're getting better, I think, overall. Spirax, I think, is slowly improving. You know, I was a little bit lower on Spirax kind of going into the year just because we hadn't seen a ton of him. At least up until that point. You know, what we'd seen in Amateur was fine, but I was never overly impressed. I think he's gotten better since the season has started, and I can definitely say the same for Yuji. The 2 people you're really kind of looking to grow the most on this team have definitely improved over time, which I think is a good sign. But outside of that, yeah, it's a good win for CLG beating a team like FlyQuest. These are the wins you kind of have to get if you want to be that #1 team, and they did it here. Moving on to Series 2 here of Day 1, we had TSM Academy taking on Evil Geniuses Academy. Another battle of teams that I actually thought were going to be really even, or really similar when you talk about going into the year. That has not been the case at all when it has come to how these teams have actually performed. This series kind of embodied that, in my opinion. EG Academy taking it 2-0. TSM Academy just looks completely lost. Even if on paper this team has some talent, it is currently not coming into place. But let's talk about what EG did right. And really that was, you know, 3 members of this team really popping off. And that was Surdy in the top lane on that Fiora game. What a Fiora clinic in game 1. Tomio having easily his best series of the year on the double Jarvan game. And I'll talk about Jarvan a lot this week. Jarvan just feels like a pick, especially in Academy, but even globally right now, that just feels almost underutilized and underrated in terms of how effective it is. It is really like game breaking if it gets it can get other lanes ahead really, really easily. And then Kaori, who's just been mega dominant all year long. He's going to be my player of the series here again. A Jinx game and an Aphelios game for him. The two champs that have kind of carried him here so far. Mostly Jinx, I'll give him that. But, it shows that, he's a late game carry. He's a really, really good late game carry. He is too good for this level. He has been phenomenal on this Evil Geniuses Academy team. He has beaten everybody that he's gone up against. It really hasn't even been that close. Honestly, Kaori is just out of this world good. It's hard to know how good Skytech is because of it. Skytech looks really, really good in this lane right now, but it's hard to know if it's just because Kaori is so ridiculously good in lane or if Skytech is actually playing really well. I'm going to lean towards the latter for now because, I want to give props to Skytech while I can. Not saying that it'll fall off or anything like that, but, honestly, Skytech is playing well right now, and I think he deserves to be mentioned for that. The spot lane in general is just clicking. Like I said, Surdy had a Fiora clinic in game 1, obliterating Viper on that Akali. Viper seems to only go to these, really aggro picks right now. Doesn't seem to have any of the more quote-unquote classic top laners in his wheelhouse. The Gwens, the Bruisers, right? Even the Ornn or anything like that. It just doesn't seem to be a part of his playstyle. And that means that if you go up against someone like Surdy who's really good on the split pushers, it's pretty easily exploitable. And that's kind of what happened in game 1. Viper's honestly had a really bad start to the year. One of the worst top laners in Academy so far this year, which is not what you wanted to hear. But then Tomio had an amazing series on the Jarvan. Like I said, the amount of pressure that Jarvan creates when you're good at him and when you're ahead is just insane. There's so much that champion can do, and it really was a big jungle gap here. And then I don't want to discredit Celigo here as well. Good games on the Vex and the Corki, doing a lot of damage, especially in that game too. But for TSM, just something is not clicking. Something's not working with this roster. I don't know what it is. I can't tell you. Hyper is going to be my dud of the series again. He's had that a couple times this year. This could have gone to Viper, who got destroyed in game 1. This could have gone to Instinct and Yursan, who were, outclassed in the bottom lane. But I thought Hyper was really the one who was the most lost. And I think this team definitely has a macro identity crisis. Whoever is calling the shots on this team, there needs to be some sort of turnover or change or something like that in how they are going about their macro decisions, because it is not working. They seem to have no synergy. It very much feels like a solo queue team, which is not exactly what you wanted to hear from an Academy roster. But yeah, I honestly, just everybody on this roster needs to get better. Takeover had a decent series, but honestly, he wasn't like unbelievable or anything. He was just the best player on TSM. So yeah, I mean, TSM definitely needs to figure some stuff out for sure. Viper and Hyper, the rhyming core on the top side here, especially, they've had really rough starts to the year, and this was not an exception. But good for Evil Geniuses. They continue on their kind of decent season. Kaori kind of carrying them to a really good record. If Surdy and Tomio and Skytech and Celigo can all continue playing like this, though, I imagine they will be closer to the top of that leaderboard than the bottom. Moving on to our third series here of day 1, we had Immortals Academy taking on Dignitas Academy. And a 1-1 tie here. They each take a game. I don't know. This series was kind of confusing to watch. Dig was really dominant in the first game here. I really want to give a big shout out to their 2 carry roles, their mid and AD carry here. Darkwings and Spawn both had really solid series. While Darkwings, 2 games of his year isn't necessarily something that pops out to you as something that you want to see, especially out of, in this meta. But they worked here. He was pretty passive early, but he was really influential in team fights late. He was doing a lot of damage. Even in game 2 when they lost, he was still doing a lot of damage. And then Spawn in game 1 had a really good game on the Caitlyn. And then another good game on Caitlyn in game 2, honestly. Their comps are basically the exact same in both games, at least for Dignitas. But yeah, a decent series here from the laners, I would say, of Dignitas. Eclipse also doing pretty decent. And then on Immortals side, when you jump into game 2, they looked pretty in control from moment 1. Mostly just because Chad is really good once he gets a lead. That's really what his big thing is. Another couple games of Jarvan here. He looked really good in the second one. Arrow and Joey, when they get ahead, are also really, really difficult to deal with. Their early game is just really strong. Typically, it's the team fighting late that they have struggle with, and they struggle holding on to leads with. But outside of that, I think their laning and their early game has been pretty solid. Even on this giant downturn here, they're like 1-6 in their last whatever, you know. Not a good, or 1-5, I should say, in their last whatever, right? Their last 6. So it's not looking good for Immortals. They're on the downturn. That's definitely for sure. I see a lot of people being upset with how he's playing this year. I honestly think he's definitely a little underrated in terms of how he's been playing. He's the most consistent member of this team for sure, is in the fact that he does the same thing every game, which is kind of ignore the early game and then try to team fight late. And that's fine. I mean, you're into an Azir, you're a LeBlanc, you're a Victor. It's not the worst thing in the world. Concept is going to be my dud of the series here. I'm not sure if I said it, but Spawn is my player of the series. My dud of the series here is going to be Concept. The novelty of him having these, like, ridiculous picks, like the Mundo and the Scion and the Singed and things like that, it's good, right? Because, you know, play what you're gonna play, at least at this stage, but at some point we are going to need him to start picking up some of the more meta picks, or at least show that he has the capability of picking up some of the more meta picks, because the outlook of a player who you know, is in Academy but can only play 3 champions just isn't very high. And so, while it's cool to see that he can play, you know, he has a style, he really likes these, like, more, you know, goofy, almost, these more gimmicky tanks, right? Up in the top lane, your Scions, your Singeds. They're things that do something different but are still really tanky, right? He likes these picks. That's great. It's great that he has a play style and we know what he likes to do, but at some point, he's got to prove that he can do more than that. And I'm just kind of waiting for that at this point. But outside of that, you know, I don't think anybody in the series played particularly terrible. Concept only gets it because he didn't do anything great. Honestly, he was kind of a non-factor for the series. But I guess you could have said the same thing about Pretty for a long time as well. I just think Pretty had a much bigger factor, at least in the team fights. So, yeah, a kind of a mess series here, honestly. Not really too much to talk about. I thought Dignitas played much better, even in their game 2 that they lost. They just got too far behind early against Chad and Arrow, who are just kind of the carries here on Immortals. And Joey, too. I don't want to take away from Joey. Those 3 are kind of the ones that are pushing Immortals forward. But for Dignitas, Spawn, Darkwing's having a really good series. XU taking a little bit of a step back. Not just this series, but this week. We'll get into that. And then I thought JJ actually had a decent series as well. And like I said, Eclipse did fine. So, overall, both teams did fine. Not too much to talk about on either side, though. Moving on to Series 4 here of Day 1, we had what was, in my opinion, the series of the week here. 2 really even teams facing off against each other. We had Team Liquid Academy taking on 100 Thieves Academy. What a series here between these 2 teams, both kind of fighting for dominance as that top team in Academy, or at least one of them with CLG here. We'll talk about Game 1 first. Game 1, while it was kind of a blowout, it was a fun blowout because we got to see Kenvi really take over, and that's kind of what we've been waiting on in 2022 here so far. Kenvi is the most hyped up Academy player by far, and we're kind of just waiting for that moment where it's just like, yes, I am too good for this level. The fact that I'm still here is ridiculous. He kind of had that in this series, especially in this Game 1 on the Nidalee. I mean, what a takeover. You pick the Renekton Nidalee, you spend a little bit of time top, but really this is about Kenvi getting super far ahead himself, and then Wixie on the Jinx just taking over in the bot lane as well. This 100 Thieves team, when they get online, is really, really difficult to deal with. They have a lot of people and players on their team that can really dominate in the late game if they have the gold, and we saw that here. And then in Game 2, it was much more back and forth. A very fun game. I highly recommend you go check it out if you haven't. Player of the game for that has to be Bradley, who took over on the Gangplank here. A really, really solid GP game. Honestly, everybody on TL played fine, but I thought everybody on 100 Thieves played fine as well, especially Wixie in that game too. You could really give player of the series here to a couple people. You could give it to Bradley for that game 2, which was really good. You could give it to Wixie for being probably the most consistent member across the 2 games. But I'm going to give it to Kenvi. His performance in Game 1 was great. His performance in Game 2 was also really good on his signature Kindred pick. So, you know, it's good to see that he's still going back to that. I would like to see him play a little bit more aggressive, I guess you could say. Sometimes he can be a little bit more passive on that Kindred pick, but he was really aggressive in this game too. It cost him sometimes, but it also got him really far ahead. He just was jungle gapping in game 1 so hard on the Nidalee, it was absurd. The Diana couldn't even play the game. But yeah, you know, as I'm sure you can guess if you watch the series, my dud of the series is going to be Armeo. And I've had a lot to say about Armeo in the series so far up to this year, but it really hasn't changed much. You know, usually Armeo is somebody who gets a lot of gold. He can get a lot of gold and then not do anything with it. Just kind of sit there and let the game be, you know, let the game be whatever it is without any involvement from him after like 15 minutes, which can be really frustrating to watch as a fan. And this one, he gets absolutely destroyed on the Diana. It's not even, I think he went like 0-7-1 in game 1. Just obliterated. His game 2 on the Viega was fine. It was definitely better, but it still wasn't unbelievable. I would argue that Kenvi was the better jungler in both games this series. So Armeo is my dud of the series. Kenvi is my player of the series, but really the big standouts here from both teams, like I said, for 100 Thieves, Kenvi and Wixie had a great series. Busio as well. I don't want to take away from Busio. Busio is in the lineup now, I should say. Sword is back down on 100 next. Busio returns here. I believe he was taking a little bit of time off for school, but I don't know what the situation was there. I'm not going to pretend like I know. But whatever it is, he's back now. He is in the roster, and he is looking like a huge upgrade here. Him and Wixie seem to have really good chemistry. They would have another really good series later in the week. And then for TL, Bradley up in the top lane. He's been the guy for this roster since day 1 this year, which has kind of been a surprise because he's the role swap up to the top lane. And this is a team that, you know, was the best or one of the best teams in Academy last year. And really only changing that top lane. And for him to come in and be kind of the most consistent best player, the one that they're playing through, I think says a lot about just how good Bradley is. You know, we were all singing his praises as a mid laner last year in Amateur. Comes up to Academy, and he's looking like he's just as mechanically talented as everyone hoped he would be. But yeah, both teams looking good here. This is a battle of two teams that I think are relatively top tier, right? This is probably 2 and 3 right now. Or, you know, we'll talk about CLG later in the week, but you know, I think that race for the #1 team in Academy is pretty wide open. And these two teams are definitely both looking at that spot and doing what they can to grab it. Ooh-wee, now we get into the series that I think everybody is waiting for me to talk about, which is the final game, or the final series here of day 1. Golden Guardians Academy taking on the debuting Cloud9 Academy. I mean, the actually debuting Cloud9 Academy. We've seen a version of this team, but not this team, not this roster. So, yep, Darshan, Malice, and Isles are in. They have had no practice. They have had no time. I believe this was their first day in from Korea. So, if not their first day, then they were back 1 day before this. It was one of the two, right? They had just gotten in from Korea, and they play a game here, and quite predictably, maybe, in that circumstance, they get absolutely obliterated. I mean, this might be the biggest stomp that I've seen in League of Legends in quite some time. I mean, this wasn't even, like, this was not playable at any moment. From the first millisecond of the game, this was not playable for Cloud9. There really is a lot to talk about, but I want to kind of keep this condensed. Let's talk about what Golden Guardians did well first, because I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about Cloud9. This is also about Golden Guardians obliterating them. Stixay, have yourself a series. Stixay and Chime, like, have yourself a series, because holy crap, did they dominate this series. Stixay is clearly my player of the series, although it could have been Chime. Both of them played unbelievable. I mean, this was just an absolute slaughter from a really good bot lane, and a bot lane that's kind of been carrying this team early in the season here while this top side has kind of been trying to find its footing. They were dominant. I mean, completely dominant. They had at least 13 kills in both games. It was unbelievable what happened. Disgusting even. I really have no other way to say it. 6A and Chime obliterated them. And then big shout out to Iconic, who had a really good series here. He's been really struggling to start the year here. He was one of the junglers that I was most low on, or most hard on at the beginning of the year here, because I expected him to come into Academy and play pretty well. He was actually pretty decent. I wouldn't say he was, like, phenomenal, but he was pretty decent at the LCS level last year. If there was any jungler that I would have expected to come in this year and kind of be, you know, at least, like, mid to top tier at the least, it would have been Iconic. He struggled definitely at the beginning of the year. Maybe the high workload did that to him, but he had a fantastic series here, just completely taking over the map. And then Ryoma also really, really good. Tony Top was fine, but he didn't really get to do much. He played Jax into an Akshan, which is a winning matchup, and just kind of sat there and did his thing, right? But let's talk about Cloud9. Yes, there are things to talk about here that weren't good, but it is important to preface, and I'm not some, for context, you want to call me an LS lover, you want to call me an LS hater, whatever you want to do, I don't really care. It's LS is a very interesting figure, and I'm glad he's in the league because it brings a lot of eyes to games like this, right? People are watching Academy, and I think that is a good thing overall. It'll be interesting to see if his strategies work out. I don't think that you can reasonably say one way or the other that this series tells you anything about that, just because, again, like I said, this team's been in Korea until the day before this game, so, it just kind of brutal circumstance overall. But they do get back here. Malice is my dud of the series. That should come as absolutely no surprise. Malice has always been a player that has a much different play style, I think, to what is popular in competitive, or something that I would consider to be meta in competitive. He's very much the power farmer, right? That's what he does, is he's going to be up 40 CS. Yes, Iconic got 800 kills bot lane, and Stixay was 11-0-4, but Malice was up 40 CS. That's his playstyle, and that's what you're going to get out of him. And so you're going to see picks like Hecarim and Udyr. Yes, you're watching the correct video. It's week 3 of 2022, not week 3 of 2021, but it didn't work here at all. He was irrelevant. He was awful even. It's definitely not an inspiring performance, but bot lane wasn't much better. King and Isles were bad. There really isn't a lot to say about that. Isles was not good on this Karma or on this Lulu at protecting King at all. And then it's not like King, you can talk about how King had a bad game, and he did, but there's only so much you can do as a Jinx into a super fed Aphelios and Xin Zhao and Thresh. And it's like, well, I guess I'll just, I can't kill them all, right? So you just, you lose that game, unfortunately. On the bright side, I thought their solo lanes were better than average. Maybe not average, but better than their other two laners. Copy still got absolutely destroyed in the mid lane by Ryoma, but Darshan was kind of irrelevant in the top lane, which I guess is an improvement on the rest. But just a horrible series here from Cloud9. They got absolutely destroyed. Like I said, it's hard to really take away anything because we don't know what this team's actually going to look like. But Golden Guardians did look really, 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 really good in this series. If they can keep that form up, then they're going to be a lot closer to where I had them in my preseason power rankings than where I have them right now. Moving on to day 2 here, and lucky for us, the first series of day 2 is actually another Cloud9 series. We get them back-to-back here. I think this is the first time that's happened all year, but Evil Geniuses Academy taking on Cloud9 Academy here. What a bounce back. I mean, this is the polar opposite of what you got on day 1. This is Cloud9 absolutely turbo-stomping Evil Geniuses. I wouldn't say turbo-stomping, because it certainly wasn't as ridiculously dominant as the day 1 series that they lost was, but it still was never really in doubt, and they were pretty much always ahead. Want to give a big shout out here to Darshan. What a series from Darshan. What a game 2 on that Zeri. Youch! That champ real hurts. This is the first time I've gotten to talk about Zeri on my channel, because this is the first series she's actually been played in. She was banned all of day 1. We'll get to talk about her a little bit more when we do the LCS video later in the week as well, but yeah, the Zeri pick really worked here in the top lane for Darshan. When that champion can kind of get rolling and get ahead, it is really difficult to deal with. And that's exactly what we saw. When you're a good player, when you have good mechanics, and when you can play her well, she can really, she has a really high skill ceiling in my, we've seen it. I was going to say in my opinion, but we've seen it. He looked dominant. He's easily my player of the series. He was awesome in that game. But big shout out here to Malice, who had about as horrendously bad of a first series in North America as you could possibly have. Goes a little bit more back to comfort. Yes, the Hecarim, the Udyr pick, those are picks that he's good at. Those are kind of your power scaling, power farming picks. But they're a little bit more, I don't want to say, they're a little bit more aggressive in sort of mentality, especially if you're behind. Like, you have to make plays on them to really get the full effect of them. Karthus and Evelynn that's not the case. These are Malice picks through and through. Karthus especially, just something where he can sit back, he can giga farm, he can press R and pick up some kills, get a ton of gold, and just slowly win the game, which is exactly what happened. The Evelynn game in game 2, we got really far ahead on that one as well. Made some questionable plays later in the game, to say the least. Dying a lot for no reason, but you know, at that point, the game was pretty much, you know, if it almost felt like limit testing. The game was pretty much locked up at that point. So, yeah, much better series here for Malice in day 2. And then, honestly, big shout out to King and Isles in the bot lane. They had also a really rough Series 1. Isles especially was not looking good. Isles looked phenomenal in this series. He was kind of controlling that bot lane pretty much the entire time on the Lulu in Game 1, and then the Nautilus in Game 2. What a series from Isles. Probably his best series that I've seen him have in quite a while. He looked phenomenal here. Isles and Darshan were really the two people that I was considering for, like, player of the series. They were both just great. King had a good series as well, or a good game as well, but really, Isles is the one controlling that lane. And then, Evil Geniuses on the other side, kind of a rough pill to swallow. They looked pretty good earlier in the week. Kaori and Skytech kind of getting bodied by King and Isles was a surprise, definitely. Especially after they played in that first series. I was shocked to see, you know, the strong point of this team kind of really get beaten, and beaten hard. Skytech is going to be my dud of the series here. He did not look good on that Karma in Game 2. The Leona in Game 1 neither, but both lanes he kind of just lost pressure. Couldn't really do anything about Isles' roams or about his lane pressure. Just a really tough game from the Evil Geniuses bot lane. Honestly, tough games from them across the board. Surdy had a rough Game 2 on the Shen. He went for this awesome play that I think would have completely turned my opinion around if he would have hit, but an unbelievable flash by Darshan, you know, keeps the C9 train rolling. His mechanics are a lot better than I think people give him credit for. I think a lot of people forget when Zion Spartan burst onto the scene back in Season 3 or whatever, Season 2, he was a Katarina one-trick. This is an assassin player. This is a guy who's known for his mechanics, and he's definitely showing them off now. And then Tomio and Saligo, I should say, weren't the best. They were kind of the weak links to this team. Tomio was definitely far behind Malice. If you're going to find somebody else to maybe give dead of the series to that wasn't Skytech or maybe even Kaori, it probably was Tomio, but it basically has to go to Skytech. It could go to Kaori as well. He didn't play particularly great, but it has to stay in that bot lane in my opinion. But either way, not a great series here from Evil Geniuses. A great series, a great bounce back here from Cloud9. If Darshan, Isles, and Malice, and King can all play like this throughout the rest of the year, this team's going to be a lot better than I think the haters, you know, kind of expect them to be. But there is definitely still a question mark. This team is definitely going to face some question marks in draft. Malice has a very particular playstyle, and I'm interested to see what's going to happen if teams decide to target that playstyle and kind of put him onto something that maybe he's a little less comfortable on. It'll be interesting to see, but either way, Cloud9 looking really good in this series. Moving on to Series 2 here of Day 2, we had Counter Logic Gaming Academy taking on 100 Thieves Academy. A battle of two pretty solid teams here. And 100 Thieves actually does take the 2-0 series win here over the top of the table CLG, who had only lost one game up to this point, not a single series, their first series loss. A great series here from 100 Academy, just a phenomenal showing from the bot lane. Busio is in, and Busio is looking great. He was phenomenal in this series. That Game 2 on the Tom Kench was really good. You're going for that fasting Senna on Wixie. Him and Busio have much better chemistry than Wixie and Sword have. That's really easy to see pretty much immediately. And Busio is going to be my player of the series here. He was phenomenal. His injection into this 100 Thieves team, I think, could be exactly what this team needed in order to take that step up to being arguably the best team in Academy. I mean, they beat who I had as the best team in Academy going into this. So, yeah, they're looking really, really good right now. I imagine the more time that they get to practice, the better that they're going to be. They're ramping up pretty quickly, but everybody on 100 Thieves is playing well, honestly. Jimmyin's had a really slow start to the year. It's pretty clear that there are definitely some communication issues between Jimmy and the rest of the team. I'm not sure how much that is impacting them, but it's definitely clear that it's happening. This series, it looked a lot better. I'm not sure whatever the reason was. Maybe it's just because they were so far ahead in the early game, but Jimmy definitely looked a lot more comfortable in this one, or maybe it's just because he's playing Corki and he can just kind of sit in lane and do whatever he wants, right? He can kind of go bot lane, but he can just ping for that, right? I don't know. Whatever it was, a lot of the issues that I had seen out of Jimmy earlier in the year didn't seem to be as hyper-present in this one. Topside definitely took a back seat in this series, but that's fine. Kenvi was good, but really this series for 100 Thieves was about how well Wixie and Busio played. For CLG, kind of a difficult series to take, I would say. I think your top laner is still playing really well here in Dokla. He's definitely still the bright spot of the CLG team. He had a really good Game 2 on the Akshan. The game was basically only even remotely playable because Akshan was pretty far ahead. That's kind of the thing with Akshan, though. If you know, you draft him on your team, he's either going to win you the game or lose you the game, and in this one, he couldn't win, so unfortunately, it was a loss. You just have to put so many resources into that champ. But, the dud of the series for me could go to a couple places. For me, it's going to go to Prismal, who's been really, really good to start the year. He had a little bit of a slower week this week, but those happen. Just not the best series here. Prismal and Breezy definitely got outplayed here by Wixie and Busio, and that's an interesting thing. They've been probably the most consistent bot lane in Academy up to this point this year, and for them to, you know, lose, I think, in pretty commanding fashion is definitely telling. But Wixie and Busio kind of played a great series here. I don't want to take away from them. Prismal having one dud of the series isn't like the end of the world. I'm not saying they're on the downturn or whatever. Everybody has bad series here and there. It's just about can they bounce back at the beginning of next week. Demonte and Rosethorn don't seem to have a ton of synergy together. That's definitely something that I'm noticing. Rosethorn played a lot better with Palafox there, and I imagine, you know, or we're going to hope that he plays a lot better once Triple comes in as well. Not that Demonte's playing poorly, just that it doesn't seem like those two necessarily click in the same way that I think it did earlier in the year for those positions. But that, you know, CLG is still a really good team. Them losing to 100 Academy isn't the worst thing in the world. This is just a really good barometer, I think, for 100 Academy to show that, yes, we are a team that should be taken seriously, and yes, we are a team that is very much in contention for that top spot in Academy. Moving on to Series 3 here of Day 2, we had Golden Guard Academy taking on FlyQuest Academy, a 1-1 series split here between these two teams. Golden Guardians is probably hoping to take this one, but either way, it's still pretty fine, I think, for both teams. FlyQuest getting a win here, especially in Game 1, was a really, really good thing for them. They definitely needed that. Let's talk about their Game 1. Yuji was my player of the game in Game 1. He was really, really solid on the Lee Sin. He's been kind of hit or miss this year so far. Little inconsistent at times, but he had a really good game here on the Lee Sin. Him and Spirax hooked up really well in that mid-jungle duo, and I think that's really what I think a lot of FlyQuest fans were looking forward to at the beginning of the year, was those were the two guys that I think you wanted to see grow and work together the most. They were kind of the two young upstarts that with a lot of potential that you wanted to see if they could really work together and become that big package deal. And it hasn't happened so far this year. I think Spirax has definitely been a lot more consistent, but Spirax also has had games where he's been, you know, irrelevant. He just hasn't had games where he's fed. Yuji's had some good games. He's had some bad games as well, but this was definitely a good one from the Lee Sin and a good one from the Victor in the mid lane as well. And then in Game 2, you know, you could really give to anybody. I'm going to give player of the game here to Chime, and player of the series is going to go to Chime in general. I thought Chime was really, really solid both earlier in the week against Cloud9, where he was just better than Isles and King. And then also in this series, where he was really dominant on the Rakan, especially in that Game 2. Very, very difficult to deal with if that pick gets ahead. And that's exactly what we saw. Iconic had a little bit of a rough Game 1, which we've seen from him a couple times, but he bounced back in Game 2 on the Jarvan. Another reason, another notch in the cap of me going, I think Jarvan is just an underrated pick right now that is really, really successful if you can get ahead early. And then Ryoma, had a really good Game 2. The Game 1, you pull out the Tristana mid, you really got to win on that pick, and he didn't win on that pick. And so, unfortunately, you just get to the point where Victor is just going to be a really tough matchup for you in general. And that ended up happening. Overall, I don't think either team played poorly here. Like I said, I think Golden Guardians, when you're looking for bright spots, that bot lane is kind of on fire right now. And I know Violet is going to be coming in here eventually for 6A, but Chime and 6A are certainly one of the best bot lanes in Academy and definitely the driving force of this Golden Guardians team right now. So you're hoping you can keep that momentum up when it's Chime and Violet. Hopefully Chime can continue off his really, really good form in Academy so far this year. And then for FlyQuest, again, positive bright spots here from your two young stars, Yuji especially, playing really, really well in that Game 1. It's definitely, those are the players that you want to see doing well. So for him to come out and have a really solid game on Lee Sin, of all things, something that's, I don't want to say meta-proof, but has, historically been decently meta-proof, I think is, again, just a really good sign. So Chime is my player of the series. I don't think I said Tomo is my dud of the series. Just didn't have a very good Game 2 here on the Aphelios. I'm a little concerned about this bot lane at this point. They are kind of being relied upon to be the veterans on this FlyQuest team, and so far they've been by far the weak links of this team, and that's definitely not what you want to see from them. But for a bot lane that played in LCS for a considerable amount of last year, they have been not good at all. Very similar to how Iconic has been on Golden Guardians. And I guess, yeah, if you have a takeaway from Golden Guardians, like a negative takeaway, it's that top side is still not just, it's not complete yet, right? Iconic still isn't playing the best that we know he can play. And then Tony Top is definitely still growing, but he's probably the weak link on this team so far. Just doesn't have that kind of top lane presence that I think other teams in Academy have yet. But still not bad from either team. I think both are going to be okay with the 1-1 draw. I think Golden Guardians would have wanted to win maybe a little bit here, but I definitely think FlyQuest is going to be fine with this result. Moving on to Series 4 here of Day 2, we had Team Liquid Academy taking on Immortals Academy. A battle of two teams that you would think would kind of be in the upper echelon, but man, Immortals has really just fallen from grace here. After going 4-0 in Week 1, they are now, 1-7 in their past 8. Not a good look for this Immortals team, but Team Liquid does take the 2-0 series win here, and they look good doing it. Hyeri is my player of the series. He looked great pretty much all series long. His LeBlanc game in Game 1, hoo-wee, that was a beaut to watch. It's really interesting with Hyeri back in now. He's been back in for 2 weeks, but, with him, here now, this top mid, solo lane dynamic is going to be really difficult to go against, because they both are, carry-oriented mid lane players that have very specific picks that they do well on. I imagine picks like the Akali are going to be just permabanned against Team Liquid. There's such a high priority ban because Bradley plays it so well in the top lane. Hyeri plays it so well in the mid lane. We see what happens when Hyeri gets on these mid lane assassins that can kind of just take over the mid game. We saw it with LeBlanc. He was dominant in that Game 1. Just really not much you could do with it. And then Game 2, it was Bradley on the Gangplank who had a really good game. Armeo on the Jarvan had a good one. Yeon on the Jinx had a good one. Honestly, Game 2 was kind of a team effort, I would say, overall. But Team Liquid looking really, really solid here. They had a pretty good week overall, I would say. Bradley looking really good. Hyeri looking really good. The solo lanes are kind of the big focal point for Team Liquid right now, and I think that's a good sign. Armeo having a much better series than he did in Series 1. Kind of got really out-jungled by Kenvi in that first series, but looking a lot better here going up against Chad, who, they kind of match playstyles a little bit, but Chad does more with the gold, but they're both really solid early game junglers. They both want to get ahead early. Armeo does a good job of getting ahead early. He picks the Jarvan, a pick that's pretty much perfect for something like that. And then they just kind of continue on. As for Immortals, like I said, they're on this giant tailspin, and they need to do whatever they can to kind of stop this. It's not even everybody on the team that's playing poorly. Really, honestly, Arrow is playing phenomenal. Arrow and Joey together are both actually really, really solid, especially in these team fights. You watch Game 2, and you're just like, man, this is Arrow versus Team Liquid, and he's doing absolutely everything he can to keep this game alive here on the Aphelios, but there's only so much that you can do when you're the only player on your team that's actively doing something. And so, just kind of tough for Immortals at this point. I would not be surprised to see Arrow and Joey up in the LCS, sooner rather than later, what with how that bot lane is currently playing. Maybe, I don't know. I like Destiny, so maybe Arrow and Destiny could be an interesting combo. You have Wild Turtle and Joey down in Academy. I think that would probably be the better combo at this point, in my opinion, but, it is what it is. Chad is going to be my dud of the series here, just out-jungled by Armeo. Like I said, kind of a matchup nightmare here. Chad is somebody who really, really does, he's at his best when he can get a huge lead early and then kind of snowball that out of control. And against Armeo, who's really only early game, unfortunately, Chad just wasn't able to get that lead that he kind of needs in order to get his ball rolling here on the Viego. But Immortals just needs to figure out what exactly is happening. Right now, you got to go back into the dressing room. You got to go back into the coaching room. You got to get the whiteboard out and you got to say, hey, we got problems and we need to fix this because it is an issue right now. But for Team Liquid, a very good win here. They're very quickly climbing up the rankings, I think, in terms of how good this Academy team is. If their solo laners keep playing like this, if Bradley can keep having really good games on the Gangplank, and then even like the Aurelia or the Akali or some of these more quote-unquote mid lane picks that he's just kind of bringing up to the top lane, that's fine here. And then Hyeri's just dominating on pretty much anything he plays right now. We know that Yeon will eventually get online. He's having a little bit of a slower start to the year, but Yeon's such a mechanically talented player that it's hard for me to believe that he won't just be on by the end of the year. I think Team Liquid is a sneaky contender to be the best team in Academy by the end of the year, and they're making a good case of that right now. That's going to bring us to our final series here of Week 3, and that was TSM Academy taking on Dignitas Academy in a 1-1 series tie here. I think TSM's going to be real happy with a tie, I think, in this case, but Dignitas probably not so much. with how their season has started. Let's talk about game 1, which was a Dig win. This was kind of off the back of Eclipse in the top lane on that Gwen. This is definitely Eclipse's best game of the year so far. He probably got that former org buff that we've seen pretty much around the world at this point. If you're playing against your former organization, you're just going to play better. And that's what happened here with Eclipse, obviously formerly of TSM Amateur. He comes back here playing against TSM, and he looks really good, outplaying Viper pretty much at every aspect in that game 1. On the Riven, might I add, Viper's Riven. So, you know, his Gwen performance in game 1 was really good. I thought XU played well on the Volibear in game 1, and then Spawn on the Aphelios really kind of took over that late game. But game 2 was a very different story. Game 2, we saw Ultra Instinct. Instinct popping off on that Jinx, absolutely taking over the game. So much so that he's going to be my player of the series here. He was so phenomenal in that game 2. Easily the best game out of anybody in this series. We've kind of been waiting for Instinct to pop off on TSM. He was a decent prospect, I think, coming into the year. Some people had high hopes. I was a little bit lower on him. I just hadn't seen enough from him in Amateur yet to really consider him one of, like, the top ADC prospects with how many good ADC prospects are in Academy right now. But this was a hell of a game. And against Spawn and JJ, who are no laughing matter in the bot lane, they are a good bot lane. Instinct looked really, really, really good on that Jinx. I really like this draft in game 2. Hyper on the Gwen. The Gwen jungle is something that I want to see more of pretty much from everybody around the world. This is a pick that I think has worked excessively well for pretty much everybody who has used it. I can see why it works as well. It just seems if you have the right kind of setup in your lanes, this is something that can go really, really positively for you. And then Takeover on the Tryndamere, I thought had a decent game there in the game 2 as well. But yeah, as for the bad parts of game 2 for Dignitas, unfortunately, XU, he had a good game in game 1 on the Volibear. He had an atrocious game in game 2 on the Xin Zhao. XU's kind of been the standout performer on this Dignitas Academy team so far in 2022. You know, he played in Lock-In. He was good in Lock-In. He's been really good in Academy. Not so much here in this series. His Xin Zhao in game 2 was very exploitable. And that's exactly what happened, is Hyper kind of took over on that Gwen. Really, really tough to deal with. This is a tough matchup. Xin Zhao and Victor into Gwen and Tryndamere, just in terms of, like, map pressure, is something that's going to be really difficult to match. And we saw that happen here. There really wasn't that much that jungle mid could really do to keep pressure on their side. But unfortunately, XU is going to be my dud of the series. But small shoutouts here to Eclipse and Darkwings in that game 1, who both played pretty well. The solo laners kind of stepping up. And then for TSM, huge shout out to Instinct and Yursan, who had a great game 2, especially Instinct, who took over on that Jinx. And then Hyper had a pretty good game 2 as well. I'm definitely still concerned about Viper, who has kind of been the weak link of this TSM Academy team so far. And with him supposedly being the veteran of the team, usually that's not the best sign in the world, but I imagine that, you know, either he'll turn it around or, you know, he won't. He's going to keep picking these aggressive picks either way, and so hopefully, for his sake, he can kind of get back on track. But, you know, a decent series from both teams. TSM's going to be happy to take a game out of this. Dignitas will be a little bit frustrated to not be able to take both, but again, this is a team that I had power ranked 10th at the beginning of the year anyway. You get, they're already outperforming expectations, I think, for a lot of people. So, you know, a decent series here from both teams. I don't think either side can be too upset with how it turned out. All right, that is going to do it. That was my Week 3 overview and analysis of all 10 series that happened in NA Academy. Up on the screen right now, on the left, you are going to see the current standings in Academy. Any ties, you know, same record will just be broken alphabetically. On the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings with how they have changed from last week. So let's go ahead and talk about the risers and the fallers. Moving up to number 1 for me in my power rankings is going to be 100 Thieves. They had a really, really good week here. I think this team adds an entirely new dynamic with Busio in there. I do think they still have a little bit of issues, but I do think that right now, if I had to project who would be the best team by the end of the year, 100 Thieves looks like they have the most under control right now. That means CLG and TL just fall down 1 slot each. I think that is your top 3. That's kind of your top tier, I think, of teams in Academy right now. Then you got your next tier here of, like, Dignitas moving up to number 4. Golden Guardians, Cloud9, Evil Geniuses. I think Immortals should still be in that tier, but they're playing like they shouldn't be. Dignitas moving up to 4, Cloud9 moving up to 6, Immortals falling all the way down to 8. That's really what this is about. Cloud9 could shoot up even further. You know, we'll see how they look now with actual practice scrim time. We know they're not going to be putting too much focus on Academy, but we'll see. And then obviously Immortals falling down. The biggest, I think, faller of anybody this year so far. They went from 1 to 9 in 2 weeks, which is not a good sign. And then TSM and FlyQuest still kind of rounding out the bottom. My player of the week is going to go to Chime here on Golden Guardians Academy. He had a really, really good week this week. A dominant win over Cloud9, a really good series against FlyQuest. He honestly just looked like the best player in Academy this week, so Chime is my player of the week, my dud of the week. I had to go for some careful consideration here, but for me, it goes to Tomo on FlyQuest Academy. That means now that both members of FlyQuest Academy have gotten a dud of the week. Diamond in week 1, here Tomo now in week 3. They just don't look good. They were supposed to be one of the best bot lanes in Academy, or at least one of the more consistent ones, and so far they've been easily one of the worst, and that team has just never really gotten off the ground. They've never gotten a chance to fly, if you will. Yes, 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 I can hear you booing. I know, I understand, I get it. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like. Leave a comment letting me know what your favorite series of the week was, who your player of the week, your dud of the week, your team of the week, all that was in the comment section below. You know I love chatting it up with you guys. I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.